And it feels, I don't
Like,
know, it just feels better. It feels better.
yeah, I like small. Well, that's why I liked it. I like small companies that are starting out because I
Right.
like to see I don't like them to be too small because
Oh, it feels like
depending,
it could break. Feels
yeah, I
like it
feel
could
like it
break
could
too
break
early.
or like
Hmm.
they just might disappear. And now I have.
Welcome, everybody, to Pros Talking Prose. I'm here with Troy Lambert, the wonderful, amazing superhuman, and myself, edits by Stacey. We are going to talk to you today about the dreaded dun 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 drummer's roll writer's block. So, Troy and I are going to hopefully give you some ideas about what might be at the root of writer's block as far as the problem, and maybe some tips and tricks on how to overcome that issue, whatever and however it's plaguing your work. So,
Gotcha.
we'll just go with that. So let me go ahead and start with a definition of writer's block. So technically, writer's block is a psychological uh, inhibition that prevents you from creating or writing or proceeding with a piece or whatever that may be. When I was in college, it had specifically to do with like writing essays. A lot of you who are probably watching this are probably working on a book or a manuscript of some kind, and so maybe you're hooked up on a chapter and you can't get past a certain point in the plot, or for whatever reason you've got a new idea for a new book, maybe, or you don't, and that's your writer's block, whatever that may be. But the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it as a psychological inhibition preventing a writer from proceeding with a piece. That is literally the words off of that page, but it is basically the feeling of being stuck. And some believe that it stems from self-doubt, or a lack of talent, or lack of ideas. I have my own opinion about what this basically can be called, and I'll save that for a second. But I did want to bring this up real fast before Troy gets into what he defines writer's block as. But some Yale researchers, Jerome Singer and Michael Barrios, they studied a group of blocked writers in a study. I don't know if they've got the title of this this actual study that they have done, but essentially it's they came up with 4 triggers for writer's block, which I find interesting. Apathy was one of them. They say that these writers feel constrained by rules. So this might be somebody who might feel
Hmm.
like they have to fit within a certain parameter, and if that might make them feel like they can't write. Anger. These writers are often narcissistic and would get angry if something is created and then goes unnoticed, which is interesting. Anxiety. These are the ones that worry that something isn't good enough. And then issues with others. And these are writers that didn't want their writing to be compared to another's work. I hear this so much in this industry where people
Oh,
are so worried that they're going to be compared to like J.K. Rowling or Patterson or, whoever. And so
whoever.
yeah, and it just blocks them from writing anything at all. So those are 4 main triggers for writer's block. And maybe you can see yourself in one of those categories, but Troy has a lot of experience with this because he's a writing coach and also a writer for many years. And I'm sure that you understand as a publisher and editor and your experience with writers in general, that you would probably have come up against this quite a bit. So what do you define writer's block as?
So first of all, I like the psychological thing. Now it's a psychological issue because it is. It's generally a mental issue.
Right.
Now, the thing that I don't define as writer's block is if you have physical ailments that keep you from writing. So whether that's a disability, a chronic illness, whatever the case may be, don't allow anybody to tell you that that's writer's block. That's not writer's block. You need to take care of yourself and deal with your body and the issues that you have, right?
Right.
So that's not writer's block. Some people will say I'm blocked because I have pain in my back because I hurt myself.
Yeah.
That's not
Also,
being
people need to
blocked.
understand that writer's
Yeah.
block, it's not a mental disorder.
No,
So,
no. It can
so
be a symptom of
right,
something else that's going on with you.
right.
But this is the thing, is usually writer's block is a symptom. It's a psychological symptom of something else that's underlying. And the biggest thing about, like, I like those triggers as well. Those are some good triggers, but I don't think they're the only ones. I don't think that's
Me
a
too.
comprehensive list.
Right.
But almost all of those are psychological in
Mm-hmm.
some way or another. One of them, not feeling like you're good enough, imposter syndrome. Hey, guess what, Mr. Writer? You're going to have that forever.
Right.
Join the club. You want to,
Right.
you want a badge? Sweet. Okay, but we're all going to experience imposter syndrome at one time or another. The only people who don't get imposter syndrome are imposters. Imposters don't get
Right.
imposter syndrome.
Narcissists.
They're
Yeah,
overly
exactly.
confident narcissists. They think they can do it all and they know everything, and they don't get imposter syndrome. If you have imposter syndrome, likelihood is you are really what you think you are, and you can work with that imposter syndrome. I'm not going to say you can get rid of it because it's not possible, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of those triggers that it's talking about, those are the underlying cause of the symptom of writer's block,
Mm-hmm.
right? So um, but I will say this. When I say, some people, I'll say writer's block does not exist. And people say, yes, it does. And I say, yes, it does, because any writer, if I bring them to a writing workshop and I put them in the right environment in that writing workshop with the right tools, whether that is pencil and paper or a laptop or a computer of some sort or whatever it is that you write on, right? I
Mm-hmm.
put you in that space, a good space and a good environment with the right tools that you need to write, and you are in the right mental headspace, you will write.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm in a writing workshop and I give the entire group a writing prompt, it is almost 100% certainty that everyone in that room will write something at that time. They're mentally prepared, they're physically prepared, they've got an idea, and they're in the right kind of a place and atmosphere to actually write. So if you can think of the symptoms that are blocking you from writing are involved with one of those things, either the tools are wrong and you can switch tools. You can switch tools. It's okay. Okay to switch
Mm-hmm.
tools. You can change your environment. You can try to write a completely different idea just to see what happens, right? So you can change all of those things that are around you. So that's part of the challenge of writer's block is, yes, it does exist, but it's because of something else. It's not, writer's block itself is not a disease or not a cause. It's a symptom.
Well, it's funny that you say that your idea is that it doesn't exist. Shonda Rhimes, who was the screenwriter and producer for like Grey's Anatomy and um, Scandal, and what else did she do? She did Crossroads and Private Practice.
Yeah.
Um, she says that she also denies its existence. She says that the reason she does is because it's very much one of those things that you can overcome. So
Hmm.
that's why she just would rather just deny that it exists, and like you said, create the circumstances in which she can write. And I'll share some of those tips here in a minute, but I will expand a little bit on what you said about imposter syndrome. I think that imposter syndrome is also kind of a version of perfectionism, which is something that I think it contributes a huge, you know, a huge amount to writer's block. Perfectionism is something that I've dealt with in terms of my own children and myself. But I think all of us to some degree have varying, I guess, yeah, varied degrees of perfectionism instilled in us in some way or another. And in the case of perfectionism being debilitating enough that it prevents you from writing, that's something that you might be noticing. And it is one of those triggers, like I said, the anxiety that they're worried that they're not good enough, or that others will judge you, that is wrapped up into that perfectionism. I do want to also reiterate that perfectionism, again, is not a mental disorder. It is a personality trait. So there is a difference there. And so Troy and I are not psychiatrists, or we're not therapists. We want to be clear here that we're not giving you guys therapeutic advice. But there are some issues and ways, there are some things that are symptoms of perfectionism that I will go ahead and outline for you. And then also there's some ways to kind of like address those things that might be debilitating. So do you understand? I mean, what's your experience with perfectionism and imposter syndrome? Like, have you ever like had a really good experience where you've kind of had to face it and face what you're trying
Oh,
to?
yeah, for sure. Well, and so the two things that affect imposter syndrome really in a lot of ways is that perfectionism and comparing yourself to other people. Not
Mm-hmm.
others comparing you to them, but you comparing yourself to them. But the problem is you're comparing someone else's final draft that's been through 6 rounds of edits to your first draft, which
Right.
is a huge mistake. But it can trigger this imposter syndrome. Look, this guy wrote this book and it's wonderful, and mine is crap. And I just can't write like that. Well, he didn't write like that the first time either. His first draft was terrible too, so it's okay. But and as part of the perfectionism too is understanding that, like, there have been times when I've been on a deadline for a book or whatever, and at that point, sometimes you just have to say, this is as done as it is going to be right now.
Right.
Like, I may have to go back and change things. I may have to go back and do other things. But as of right now, this book is done. That does not mean it's perfect, right? And the other thing about perfectionism is that you're just never going to achieve it. You're
Yeah.
never
It's
going to achieve it.
unrealistic. Mm-hmm.
You can have the best editors in the world, the best formatters, the best copywriters in the world, and I guarantee you almost every book on the planet has at least one typo in it. But think about this. If you go through your book and it's 75,000 words and you have 7 typos, what is that for accuracy?
Well, it's nearly
99 point
98%.
some
Yeah.
percent?
Like, yeah, I would say it's almost 99%.
99%, somewhere in that
And
range,
industry
right?
standard, I think, is 95%.
Well, yeah, industry standard is 95%. Like, the only people we hold to 100% standards like that is doctors, not even lawyers. And
Yeah.
even
And
doctors are allowed to make mistakes. That's
right.
why you get a second opinion.
Right.
So as writers, and because too of some readers that hold us to these completely unrealistic expectations, we hold ourselves to completely unrealistic expectations. But I guarantee in any other job at the planet, if you're performing at 99% efficiency 100% of the time, you own the company pretty shortly. I mean, let's be real about this. That
Yeah.
is, people are people. We make mistakes, and you don't there's no other industry in the world that's going to expect you to be at that level of perfection. So stop expecting it from yourself,
Right.
by yourself, because it's not going to happen. So just, if you, that is a part of that perfection. But anyway, I've been in that experience where I've had deadlines and it's just like, this is not perfect. And I know it's not perfect. And it's going out the door anyway, because that's
Mhm.
what has to happen right now. So,
I
yeah.
will say that a lot of times I come up against this with authors that will hand me over a manuscript and they're apologetic left and right. I'm so sorry. I'm not the best grammarian. I'm not and I don't know if it's ready to be published or whatever, and blah, 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 blah. And I'll admit, every time I get a manuscript, there is room for improvement. I haven't had one manuscript yet that there wasn't something that we could have done to improve it. And honestly, after I take on a manuscript and give it to and like do my bit, and then it is given to another editor, I guarantee you that other editor will also find more that can be improved upon. We all have our own opinions and perspectives and lenses that we apply to these things. And in all honesty, readers, reviewers, they're also going to have their own lenses and perspectives, and they're going to have their own opinion about your manuscripts. So if you are using that as an excuse to prevent you from writing, it's there's never an end to that. There's never going to
No.
be a perfect manuscript that's going to please everybody. You have to at some point say, this is, like what Troy said, the end. I'm done. This is all I can do for this manuscript. And this is just, now it's time for this to leave my head and go into the heads of others.
Yep.
So just so you know, verywellhealth.com, it's a really great website that I found when I was like doing some research on perfectionism. And they say that striving for a high degree of success isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, adaptive perfectionism, which involves conscientious organization, striving for excellence, and ambitious goals, is linked to career success, high self-esteem, happiness, and greater life satisfaction, unquote. That is true. Like you always want to strive for perfection. You don't want to not strive for excellence. But maladaptive perfectionism is what they are referring to, this perfectionism that's debilitating, involves an intense desire for others' approvals and unrealistic expectations and negative self-talk. And so it literally can prevent you from doing anything. I mean, it could probably even come, in some cases, it can lead to depression. It can lead to anxiety. It can lead to, poor relationships. It could destroy,
Oh,
it
yeah.
could destroy a whole mess of your life if you're not aware of the symptoms. And so, just for the sake of, what we're talking about here, there are 3 types of perfectionism, according to this study that was called child-oriented and partner-oriented perfectionism. Anyway, it's self-oriented types of perfectionists. They place excessively high demands on themselves. Others oriented, they set their high expectations on other people, and they make those demands and tell them to fix their perceived flaws, which I feel like is almost egocentric. like really?
Mhm.
But that is a form of
Yes.
perfectionism. This is probably not the kind that affects writers so much, though. But the self-oriented is probably definitely one, and then the other one is socially prescribed, which is the perception of others and what you perceive they're going to feel for you. But these all have a common theme, and that common theme is the fear of failure. And so
Mhm.
what you need to do is kind of like, I guess, overcome that fear of failure. And so we can easily just transition now into, okay, how do you overcome that? So Troy, what you mentioned a few things that you do. So let's outline those a little bit more specifically. So what are some of the tips and tricks you would give to somebody in terms of like overcoming that perfectionism or that writer's block?
So first of all, one of the biggest things is self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of like knowing your personality type, stuff like that, because this fear is going to manifest itself in different ways. That fear
Right.
of failure is going to manifest itself in you're fearing that you're going to fail other people, or you're feeling that you're going to fail yourself, or you're just going to feel like in the circumstances you're going to be seen as a failure, or something along that line. And that a lot of that depends on who you are as a person. What's your personality type? What is important to you? What are your core fears and your core desires? And what do you really want from life? Okay. Because part of writing, the most important part of being a writer is understanding your why, like
Mm-hmm.
why you do this. Because your motivation is what gets you through writer's block, but also gets you through the days that are going to be crappy, because there are going to be crappy days, right? And so understanding your why, sometimes it helps to do something to walk away from your writing and remind yourself of why that writing is important and why you want to do it. Now, people will tell you, don't forsake your writing time. Don't misuse your writing appointment that you have for yourself, right? But sometimes the best thing you can do with that time, if you're unable to write because of this writer's block that's happening to you, is to step away and ask yourself, what is this piece not doing for me?
Mm,
Like, why do I not want to finish it? What is it that's missing here? Is this me missing something? Is it the writing missing something? Am I out of ideas? What do I need to keep going? And so that's a part of that, just taking the time to do that. Now, writers have done all kinds of things to either get new ideas or to reset the writer brain. Douglas Adams took baths.
mm,
That was his thing. When he
mm-hmm.
was in the middle of writing a book, sometimes he took 8 baths a day. So he
Wow.
probably had amazing skin. He also had a huge bathtub. He had to because the guy was huge. But I mean, he took a baths. Vince Gilligan takes showers.
Yeah. Well, one of the tips that I was going to bring up for this is actually do mundane things. If you need to step away, do something mundane, something that doesn't require your brain, something that is just done by like on autopilot, because what that does is it frees up your brain and gives you the chance to have that white space that we like to describe sometimes in the writer's world, and it creates that white space for you
Yep.
to be able to think about new ideas and new things. So yeah, very much the shower thing works for me too all the time, and I always get pissed because I'll come up with an
Oh, yeah.
idea and then forget to write it down. So
You gotta have a waterproof recorder in there.
see,
I
there
mean,
you
and
go.
people think I'm being funny, but I'm like, look,
That's
there are
totally
times when,
true.
like, having something by your bedside. So if you
Hmm.
wake up in the middle of the night and you've got the perfect idea that's gonna, now try to write it down in some comprehensible way, but sometimes it's hard to do when you do it in the middle of the night and just first thing. Because sometimes I'll get up in the morning and I'll look at my phone and I'm like, what was I talking about? Like, what was I even thinking? I have no idea what that sentence means. But
Green
last night,
dragons
apparently, I
eat
thought my morning
peanuts.
brain was going to interpret that somehow. But and but seriously, like the shower or go for a walk in
Yeah.
nature. Just empty your mind. Take
Empty
your
your mind.
dog
Yeah.
with you, whatever. But sometimes, and this is, don't take your partner with you.
Right.
You say, I'm going for a walk. And I say, I would like to come with you. You say, I'd rather you not.
Yeah. This is,
Or some other nice way of saying that. But
yeah.
I need this time for me to reset my writer brain, and I need to be alone. Because you
Yeah.
do need to be alone.
Yeah.
Now,
You
some
need to
people can
be
listen to
bored.
music, you can do whatever, but you
Mm-hmm.
need to be relaxed and
Mm-hmm.
bored
And
so
bored.
that your brain can fill in those blanks for you.
Mm-hmm.
So stepping away, there's nothing wrong with saying, this is my hour of writing time, but since I can't write, I'm going to go for a 30-minute walk and then come back. And if you only get half of your words that day that you wanted to, but you get half rather than zero,
Right.
it was worth it. Don't stay sitting there and get zero and
Right.
continue to get zero, because the longer you get zero, the worse that is for your brain.
Right.
Your brain
Right.
will not, like, I mean, even recently, like, I've had so many projects going on. Sometimes it's like, it's hard to just sit down and go, I want to concentrate on this piece, but I was on a deadline for a short story for a collection that's coming out. I needed to get it done so I could get it to the editor so I can edit the rest of the stories. And I'm like, I just sat down and I was like, I'm just going to pour this thing out. And by golly, it worked. You
Yeah.
have a deadline. I was able to empty my mind and sit there and shut everything else off. Turn off the internet on your computer. Don't get your email notifications. Nothing like that. It's too distracting. You will not be able to control it. If you say, I can go on Facebook for 5 minutes, you're lying to
Right.
yourself.
Right.
Don't do it. Right? Don't do those things. Just allow your brain to be empty. Now, some people can just sit in front of their computer and let that happen. Right? And a lot of times, like in
Yeah.
this case, I was able to do that. But that
Yeah.
doesn't always work. So I
Yeah.
have to try different techniques. So if something isn't working, you say, showers used to work for me and they're not working anymore. Then go do
Try something new.
something else.
Right. Try
Try
something
something
new.
new. It is okay.
That's
Do
one of the,
whatever
yeah.
works.
Try something
Anyway,
new.
yeah.
So, Masterclass, they have a great, if you guys haven't been on Masterclass, honestly, Neil Gaiman, Dan Brown, there's some great, Judy Bloom is on there, like there's some great writers on there
James
that give,
Patterson.
James
Yeah.
Patterson, yeah, great writers on there that are giving great courses on there, and I love it. But one of the things that I liked was that they have a specific post, I guess, blog on writer's block, and they give some great tips. And we've talked about a couple. Take a break was one of them, and then you said set a deadline. That was one of them. But when you do set a deadline, keep in mind that the deadline, when you do that, I would make sure that you do it in such a way that it's a positive, like you said, and that you're eliminating distractions, because sometimes if you set a deadline, a lot of times people will that will actually create the writer's block. So know thyself, I guess, is the key to that. But if you work well under pressure, you create a deadline.
Yeah.
One of the other things that they talked about, and I love this one because I always tell my writers this that are kind of stumped, is jump ahead. So,
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of writing the ending first, or at least having an idea of where your character is going to end, so that
Mm-hmm.
what you can work backwards from there, and know that you have to create certain plot points to get your character there. And so sometimes that will free up your brain if you can think out the ending. So don't be afraid to jump around if you need to, and do certain scenes and come back to the scene that you were probably working on. Half the time you might find out that where you were at, the reason you were stumped is because it didn't fit. Maybe it
Didn't
didn't
work.
go in what you were doing. Maybe it's not where your character needed to go. Um, Donna McCain, oh, sweet gal. One of the things that I loved, she always talked about her muse, and she would always talk about how my muse didn't want to do that. My muse didn't want to do this. My muse wasn't happy. I loved the way she talked about her muse, but it's true. It's very much
So
that
true.
idea of that there might be other forces at work here, whether they be your subconscious, or you believe that there is a conscious entity that is guiding you. Whatever you may believe in that process, there might be something that's working against you. So maybe jumping ahead and working backwards will help you understand that where you need to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Or write a different scene about your character. Write
Yeah.
something about their childhood, about the character that's in that scene. And sometimes you'll uncover in the back of your brain something that happened to them years ago. And this gets into the kind of the woo-woo side of writing. And I'm like, I don't care what you believe as far as your religious beliefs or whatever like that. But a lot of times when you are a storyteller, you're channeling a story. Now, where
Mhm.
that is coming from, whether that's from your own brain, your own imagination, the universe, something else, whatever it is, I don't care where you believe it comes from, but it is not coming from your conscious mind all the time. Because if it is, it's probably crap. Okay. Let's just be honest.
Probably.
Okay. So we're channeling stories. So and sometimes you have to restore that channel.
Right.
And so working your way backwards is a great idea, because this is one of the things I talk about all the time, right? Planning, plotting and planning. I talk about plotting and planning all the time. Why do I talk about plotting? Because if you know where you're going, it's easier to get there.
Mhm.
So it doesn't, sometimes you're blocked because you took a wrong turn at Albuquerque. And now you're like, where in the world am I? I'm stuck. Right. But another writer friend of ours, Michael Brent Collins, one of the things he
Mhm.
says to do is to write something absolutely ridiculous that would not happen in your plot. You're writing a straight romance and you say, Steve turned and kissed Bill on the lips. And your muse goes,
What?
he did what? That makes no sense. And then your muse will also go, you idiot. This is what really happens. And you will get yourself back on track. Or you're in a
Right.
thriller novel and you're like, and the building exploded and my main character died.
Yeah.
And you go, no, that can't happen.
That
That's
can't
not what
happen.
happens right here. And your muse goes, oh yeah, well, this is what happens there. Because basically you ticked it off on purpose.
Yeah.
So sometimes that is a method that works. Now, not all, like the main thing about any of these methods is not all of them work all the time.
Right.
So sometimes you just have to try different things to see what works. Like we were talking
Right.
about, walking or going in the shower. Same thing with like writing something ridiculous or writing from the end or creating a plan, whatever it is. Sometimes you just have to mix it up and see, oh, that didn't work. Well, let me try this and see if that unfrees my brain and unsticks my brain. Right.
Right.
It's again, the going back to that definition, this is psychological. This is something happening in your head that's messing with your writer flow. And the more often you can get rid of that and get into the flow state, the better stories that you have. I have a short story collection coming out with Kristen Lamb,
Oh,
and
fun.
we both have stories in there that we wrote that we sat down and the story came out.
Mm-hmm.
Like no choice on our part, like it just flowed out. And hers is titled Crossroads. And she's like, I just sent you the perfect story when she sent it to me. And I'm like, right, whatever, because everybody's like, oh yeah, it's the perfect
Yeah.
one.
My story's the best. Yeah.
But it's very good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's really good because it was in that, it happened in that flow state. And I have one in the same book that's called Jesus Had a Dog Named Lucifer. And
I remember
that's
you telling me about that.
and it is an awesome story, but it like just can't, like I was like, I want to finish the story, and I went hands on keyboard, and I went almost instantly into that writer flow state we talked about, and there could not a bomb could have gone off and it wouldn't have blocked me at that
So
point.
is it kind of like free
That's the
writing
state you
then?
want to find.
Like it's a free writing state? So that is one of the tips that
Hmm.
Masterclass gives is free write. That's a really good point. To be able to just give yourself the room to just write what your brain is pumping out. Yeah, that's a really good point. I like
Yep.
that. I like that.
Don't get hung up. The other thing is change your method. This is a
Mm.
remarkable too.
Oh, I love those things.
And so, and I have the type folio too. But if you're blocked, don't type on it.
Right.
Handwrite on it.
Mm-hmm.
Handwrite. Switch to handwriting. Now you're going to have to obviously translate that back to typing at some point if you're going to use that in your book, but your brain slows down because your hand can't move as fast writing as it can typing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it kind of resets your brain, resets
Right.
your speed, makes you slow down for
That's
sure.
a good point. I love that. I love that idea too. So we've talked about a few things here. We talked about taking a break, jumping ahead, do something mundane, free write, the deadline. And then I like this last tip, which was pretend you've never read your work before. I like that, but at the same time, I'm going to have to like put in a word of caution here. Every one of us, when we pick up our writing, we know we've written it and it's very difficult for you to separate yourself from it. So the only way that I think that this would be successfully done is if you give yourself some distance on time. So if you like, and I've heard you say this before, step away and then come back to it later. And I kind of feel like this is where this kind of tip would fit in here. But aside from this, I think I would go one step further and say, why don't you give your writing to somebody else? Maybe give it to another writer who you trust that would be willing to say, or an editor. I mean, I've had collaborations with authors where I've said, hey, have you thought about taking your character this direction? Because those moments oftentimes will free up your brain and give you the chance and the room to say, oh, that would work. Oh, I never even thought about that. Good example is recently I had a client that I was working on his book. It was done. It was a good manuscript in its current state and was ready to be published. I was actually getting the final stages of editing done, and he really didn't need a developmental edit. He had a great solid story. But at the end of the story, I gave my 2 cents just as a reader of that genre. I love that. I love, thrillers and political thrillers and military thrillers, and that's where this book was. And I suggested that one of his characters not really be dead. I was like, what if? And he's like, oh, and then I said, but you know what? You should have him come back earlier. He should actually be the one when he reveals he's alive. Like he should be the one that actually fights with the antagonist, the villain. And he's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. So it was one of those moments where it was like, and it really did. It created this nice, it created a longer climax, so the ending didn't feel rushed, so the resolution wasn't too fast. And just by doing that one thing, it created it fixed the pacing issue at the end. So like I said, at the onset of writer's block, if you feel like you just don't know where you should be going, like maybe you've tried everything that we've mentioned here before and it hasn't worked. Maybe it is time to hand the manuscript over to somebody else and see what they might see that you haven't thought of.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was going to be my last tip, is actually brainstorm with your community.
Yeah.
You should have writer friends of yours that, first of all, they understand perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and they understand writer's block because they've been there, right? They've been stuck, they've been blocked. So they may have some ideas to get you unstuck, but they also may have some ideas of like your plot that they can go, well, what about this? And I have a friend of mine who I brainstorm with all the time, and I never come up with the solution for her problem. I bounce ideas off of her, and she says no to every one of my ideas, almost without exception, every time. But by the end of that conversation, that has allowed her to find her own path forward,
Right.
because she's found it through all the no's, all the times I've said, and she said, that wouldn't work because, no, I'm not going to do it that way. That wouldn't work because, and all of a sudden she goes, oh, but if I did this, it would work. I'm like, you're welcome.
Yeah. Yep.
I didn't do anything.
No, but you gave her the space to think about it. Yeah. And that's really the point. So yeah, the collaboration, you may not like their idea, but it maybe by them giving you the ideas, it gives you that, when you were talking about earlier where you piss off your muse just to see what's going to happen,
Yep.
That might be what you need, is that trigger. So that's a good point.
Yeah. It's kind of wacky the way sometimes that you get around writer's block. But the truth is, it's conquerable. The only things I tell people is, if you have mental issues, mental illness, or physical illness that makes you unable to write, that is not writer's block.
Right.
That is time for self-care. But if it's not that, it's a psychological thing that you can overcome. So put yourself in the right mental space, in the right place, with the right attitude, the right tools. Go reset your brain, whatever it is that you need to do, because you can write.
Right.
You are a writer. You can write. You just need to set yourself up properly to do it and get it done.
Right. So just to address one more time that perfectionism, again, isn't a mental disorder. It's a personality trait, and that it's something, like you said, it's something psychological that you can overcome. The ways to overcome perfectionism, we've talked about these: set realistic goals, try new things. These are part of the tips that, we've been talking about for writer's block as well. Practice mindfulness, which is, again, reducing your anxiety and going for those walks and taking the showers and kind of relaxing your brain, becoming bored, breathing through any kind of anxiety that you might be feeling. And then something that they also brought up on that Very Well Health website was try CBT therapy, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, this is something that you would have to do with a therapist. And this is when this is when I would say you would employ a therapist if it's becoming so debilitative that it's stopping you from living a quality life. But CBT therapy might work for you. But I have my best friend is actually a therapist, and I talked to her about this a little bit this morning, actually, about CBT, and she's not a fan of CBT. She's actually a fan of ACT, which is called, what I wrote this down somewhere. She called it acceptance and commitment therapy. And acceptance and commitment therapy is where you actually take the thought or behavior that you are experiencing, and instead of placing blame or making it bad and trying to change it, you instead ask yourself if it is a positive and helpful thought or if it's a negative, debilitative thought. And then you categorize it and deal with it once you face that idea. Her idea as a therapist is that CBT is sometimes debilitative in that you are trying to change a thought, and we're all human and we sometimes slip back into those thoughts. And so sometimes that just means you're going to constantly end up back in therapy because you haven't dealt with it, which is why she talked about the ACT instead of the CBT. But again, these are things you need to talk about with your therapist if it's getting to this point. But in terms of writer's block and it being this psychological behavior, it is literally just going to be you understanding that perfectionism is an unattainable and unrealistic goal. And that really, in all honesty, this is about you creating something that only you can create. And Troy and I have addressed this before. When Troy, one time you brought up the fact that some newbie writers are afraid that their manuscripts are going to be stolen, and you said that may happen, but instead of being fearful that it's going to take away from your creative process and your rights as that creator, understand that the perspective and the lens that person is going to write from is different from yours. And so ultimately it won't be the same regardless of writing the same story anyway. Who was it I was listening to just the other day? Somebody said there are only 8 stories in the world anyway. Oh, it was the behavior panel. Again, I'm listening to these guys all the time. But they were talking about this one particular character that they were analyzing, and they were saying that he was mimicking like Montauk from Fahrenheit 451, or Ahab going after the whale, and he's just this protagonist in this ongoing story. And one of the guys even mentioned, he's like, well, there are only 8 stories out there, we just keep retelling it over and over again. And it's true. To an extent, it is very true. So don't worry about your story not being perfect, because it's the same story everybody tells. But it's yours. It's your perspective that's unique, and it's your perspective that's what's going to make that story special. And ultimately, that you keeping that from the world is actually not doing you any good, but it's also not doing us any good as readers and receivers of that story. So
yes, I mean, this is your story matters.
Right.
Like, it matters, and you deserve the ability to tell it. And you, as a writer, so I will say this and one of these days we'll have this talk about what happens when you can't write because of circumstances that you're in or whatever. Because I've had those circumstances. And it was really, really bad for my mental health, my physical health, every aspect of it. But a writer who is not writing is a monster courting insanity. And I know people have heard this quote before, but it is absolutely true. If you're a creator and you're not creating, if you're a writer and you're not writing, you are not doing your mental health any favors at all. So when we say get in therapy, if this is interfering with your ability to live life, if you are a writer, writing is a part of your ability to live life. Do not let it go on too long.
Right.
If you need help, find it, because all it will do for you is get worse before it gets better. And none of us want that.
Right.
None of us want that.
Right. Again, we're constantly, Troy and I are constantly plugging getting involved in your local writing community, because if anything, it is group therapy to a certain extent.
It is.
Being with people that are like-minded and working towards the same kind of same type of goals is very helpful. For your, again, for your mental health and for your physical well-being. We want to make sure that you're getting past these things that are stopping you from becoming the person you are meant to be. So yeah, I feel like ultimately, yes, you can deny its existence, writer's block's existence, to the extent that you know that there are ways to combat it, and just work towards getting over that, that obstacle. And hopefully it's never more than just an anthill that you at the time were perceiving as a huge Everest sized pile.
Yeah.
Because most of the time you might get over that and look back and realize that it was just a small mound.
Yeah. It wasn't as
Yeah.
bad as you thought it was.
Right,
So,
exactly. And so again, there are lots of resources out there. I've cited a few here today. And again, you can always reach out to your writers groups, and your library, your local library always knows who the writers are in the community. It's because we writers love to just talk to those librarians on a reg. But yeah, just reach out to your universities and your community clubs and book clubs and so on, to see if there's anybody or anything out there that can help you overcome these obstacles. But again, just remember that you're not alone, and that writing is definitely something that requires time and talent to develop, but sitting and doing nothing is not going to help you develop that talent, or like we said, get that story out there to people who need to hear it. So do you have any final words of advice, Troy, before we send this out into
no,
the ether?
I think that's a great way to end it, is just, if you need help, look for help. But there are tons of resources out there about how to beat writer's block. And as I often say, denial is not just a river in Egypt. And I can live there as much as the next guy, but the reason I'd like to say that writer's block doesn't exist is I want to nullify its effect on writers. I want you to
Right.
understand what it is as a symptom, and that you can get over it. So if you're
Right.
experiencing writer's block, I'm not belittling that. I'm just telling you, you can overcome, and you will.
Yeah, exactly. So use these tips. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys, and we'll be seeing you in a couple weeks with our next little topic. And Troy, thanks again for being here. This week has been extremely busy for both of us, and so I appreciate the time that you took out to chat with me today. And we look forward to you guys visiting us on the next Pros Talking Prose. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.